So welcome to the launch of the 25th issue of Garland, Craft, Currencies, which is quite a feast of articles which reflect a path that a number of pathfinders have helped us identify in terms of the relationship between rich and poor in craft, the gallery and the shop. And this is quite an important division in craft, that the idea of a currency, something which circulates and connects these worlds, has proven to be very useful in terms of the stories that are gathered. We've got quite a range of people, but firstly, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you on Wurundjeri land in Naarm, Melbourne, and pay my respects to their elders and elders of the Kulin Nation, past and present, and say how much the Indigenous cultures of Australia inspire us and hopefully inspire the Garland platform to be good custodians, to be good ancestors, to have the same kind of commitment to passing on to future generations that we see in those cultures. So we've got a wonderful feast of stories to share, and in terms of the contents, I'd like to welcome first Liliana Morai from Tokyo. Is that right? If you could tell us a bit about the story that you shared, which has been quite important, and I'll just put it up on the, just a sec. Good, I'll just put it up on the screen. Now, this story, let's go back to the campfire, the lesson of Minges. So welcome, Liliana.
Thank you, Kevin, for the introduction and for calling me first. So yes, I am in Tokyo. I've been in Tokyo for 6 years, I think now. And this article is the result of, I guess, part of my research as a PhD student here in Tokyo, and also part of my thoughts that arise when I'm teaching about modern crafts at university, and then also the discussions that we had as a group for the creation of this edition, together with Kevin, also greatly contributed to the thoughts that I put into this article. And so I was asked by Kevin to talk about a little bit about the role of Minge, the Japanese folk crafts movement, within this dichotomy between rich and poor, and how, I guess, I reflected on how that often that light shed on crafts, and I should say handicrafts in particular, often throughout history has been shaped by inequalities, class inequalities, but also geopolitical inequalities, often with people, often intellectuals, wealthy upper and upper class intellectuals kind of discover the beauty of the handwork made by common people, and the irony that comes from that light shed on the beauty of those articles, handmade articles, is that they often end up leaving the life of those communities where they were once made in. And so even for the definition of craft, we have an important aspect of this class, the importance of class and labor, the politics of labor, how labor and exploitation is conceived. And so since William Morris, one of the first people to shed light on craft, there was already this pointing out this irony and this dichotomy that happens. And we see that also in the folk crafts movement by Yanagi Soetsu, Japanese philosopher, that was greatly influenced by William Morris. And so I just laid down some thoughts, maybe not very structured. I kind of went thinking as I wrote about what happens when we have this contact between rich and poor, and what has happened to craft. And this is maybe looking at the past more, what has happened to craft when we see that contact, often intellectuals and upper middle class, looking at everyday objects as objects to be fetishized, sometimes as a token of foreign land, as a token of a nostalgic countryside. And I didn't want to end in a negative note. And so towards the end of the article, in the last section, I put up some a few, I guess, thoughts on how we can recover craft for the lives of common people, I suppose, and not something that takes part in our everyday lives. And I ended up with image of a campfire, of a gathering around a campfire, which happened very often in a town in Brazil where I lived, in Cunha, which is known for being a Borigama town, but that's a whole other topic. And the people making craft there, artists and craftspeople, whatever we want to call them, often gather around eating and drinking and using each other's tools for those everyday, I guess, pleasures that involve people getting together and enjoying those handicraft objects. And so I ended up on that note. So I hope you read the article, because it's really hard to try to summarize it here in a few minutes. And so, yes, I'll end up here. Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you, Liliana. And it's a real demonstration, I think, of the kind of global dialogue with the way you take a fresh Brazilian perspective onto something like Mingue. And just a heads up that we'll soon publish an interview with your colleague, Yuki Kikuchi, Professor of Craft in Kanazawa, who responds to your challenge about Mingue and talks about the role of Muji and Manga as, in a sense, embodying much of the spirit of Mingue, even if not being recognizable in terms of their traditions there. So thank you so much. Arigato, obrigado. Now we go to Western Australia, to Melissa Cameron. And Melissa, are you there? Very interesting article, which continues to draw on the wonders of the Indian Ocean Craft Triennial, and particularly the way in which a certain product emerged from this quite sobering installation there around the tragedy of Jukan shelter. So Melissa, would you like to talk us through your story?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. Am I being heard?
Yes, you are.
I want to check. Great, thank you. I want to acknowledge that I'm coming from Wajak Noongar Butcher today from Burlu in Western Australia. And I also want to acknowledge the people, the Putu Kunti Kurama Rampinikura peoples of the northwest of Western Australia, who are near the town we now know as Tom Price, on which part of this narrative kind of takes place. So the work that I made for the Indian Ocean Craft Triennial earlier this year is called Jukan Tears, and you can see it on the screen at the moment. On the left-hand side is a picture of the Rio Tinto building, which is the tallest building in Perth, otherwise known as Central Park. That's the kind of the original building name, but it was sort of retitled when Rio purchased it. And then on the right-hand side is 4,600 teardrop shapes, which actually were removed from the panel on the left-hand side to create that artwork. So what you see is a drawing made from the removal of teardrop shapes, rather than an actual kind of drawing over the top of those panels as it might appear. So the line work is see-through. And when I was approaching this article, Kevin sort of suggested that an interesting thing is that I also made a series of works called Jukantirs offcuts, which were pieces made from the offcuts of making that larger work, Jukantirs. Once I'd finished making the large work, I sort of put everything aside for a little while and then recognized that all of these smaller pieces and parts that had become superfluous in the making process, they weren't part of the actual panel on the left, and they weren't part of the teardrop shapes that are hung in the space on the right. They were the pieces that normally, if you were making something jewelry scale, would be quite small, little pieces of swarf or tiny offcuts and things. But in making a work as large as I did, the offcut shapes were actually big enough to make jewelry works in and of themselves. So I approached that and then was able to display them inside the gift store of the John Curtin Gallery, where the larger work was being displayed. So they were immediately in context from the larger piece. And as the pieces gradually started to sell, I was able to have conversations with a few people who purchased these works. And so the article that I have produced for this issue of Garland is talking to one of the people who purchased one of the works, Tanya Lee, who is an artist who is currently based in the northwest of Western Australia in Broome. And so she kindly, graciously allowed herself to be interviewed to talk about her thoughts on the piece that she had purchased and her thoughts in general of how owning a part of the grander large work impacted her, and how she felt about having a small piece of the offcuts of this work. And I think in the article, she sort of goes on to say her owning a piece is acknowledging the fraughtness of the ongoing colonial violence that's become very apparent to her since she's moved to Broome. She's sort of been there maybe a year and a half since COVID times. So it's a bit of a new experience for her, though she's always had family up in Broome, so she's always gone back and forth in a way. She also recognises the associations that jewellery has with mourning jewellery. So she was a really interesting person to talk to about this particular series. And I think by the end of it, I was able to have a new appreciation of these works as well, because I was very tentative in putting these into the gallery. I thought it could be a risk of diminishing the larger work and perhaps almost like serializing the story of that larger piece into kind of more digestible little chunks, which I feared might take away from the grander kind of thing and the big, powerful message that the larger work has. But in keeping with the theme of this article, of this issue, I actually found out that having both the high and low of craft, something that was on, a monumental gallery wall, and then something that was a bit more lowly in the gift shop, kind of gave the narrative a third place to reside in, so that it became less about maybe producing the postcard that would go home with the museum visitor, and more about extending the artwork into the homes of people who had seen the show and allowing the story to be told through their eyes, and then having a greater life because of that, which has been a really pleasant thing to find out.
Great, thank you so much, Melissa. And we really look forward to your role as social curator in this issue in looking at allied stories to yours in terms of the way in which value is made through making that can also go outside the normal commodity exchange. But certainly putting something like this into the commodity exchange is quite eye-opening. Now, can we go to another interesting flip in terms of putting work in the gallery and in the shop that tells a particularly interesting tale. This is by Honor Freeman, Ghost Objects. Honor, you, yes, you are. great to see you here. And yes, your work was quite poignant, I felt, because it related to an exhibition held during lockdown in Sydney at Sabia Galleries, which is arguably one of the most prestigious art galleries for craft in Australia, if you can say that. And yet your work, like the kind of Minge spirit that Liliana was talking about, embodies so much of the everyday. So please, can you tell us a bit about what you were saying through this article?
Yeah, certainly. Hello, everybody. And I'd like to also acknowledge that I'm coming to you tonight from my home and studio on Narrandjeri land, which is in southern Australia, in South Australia, in a place called Ramong, which was known to the Ramandjeri people, but known to us as Encounter Bay. My article, I guess, essentially Ghost Objects, Crafting the Poetry of the Everyday, is a reflection on my ceramic practice, kind of moving between the kind of the high-end commercial gallery context of the very traditional sort of white cube, and also it's the shift to the more playful streetscape, which I run to every so often within my practice for the I guess for the kind of the very democracy of that, I suppose. So much of my practice has involved employing a very industrial process called slip casting, which is sort of where I have gathered the term ghost objects. It's a process where I use it allows me to create multiples, but it allows me also to create these objects that are really specific memories of another previous form, kind of like a whispering or a ghost of that object. And so at this time, having a very major solo exhibition at a high-end gallery where nobody could come and see or engage with these objects in a very intimate way, sort of placing them out of reach. It was kind of I guess very oppositional at that moment, I suppose. And it was also a time where many of us during the pandemic have been reflecting on, this return to hand washing and rituals, and it seemed very poignant to me to kind of delve deeper and reflect on this object that is so kind of benign, yet holds this sort of quiet power through time. So yeah, I was sort of exploring that, and also this idea of kind of mending and tending the cracks or the scars in the soaps with gold. Earlier on in the pandemic, within my own neighbourhood, when I was living back up in Adelaide, I had also returned to a sort of an earlier idea of bringing work to the street when none of us could get to galleries, or we couldn't sort of move about in public spaces, sort of in an internal gallery sense, I suppose. A good colleague and friend of mine, Louise, excuse me, Flaherty, decided that we would join forces and bring our work to the street, to our community. And so objects that I have kind of, I guess, lovingly tended and cared for and made in the same, to all intents and purposes, the same time and care has been spent creating these objects that we've sort of gifted to the street for people to encounter on their strolls and their walks. And so these, again, are these sort of very humble everyday objects that all of us kind of know and understand and we engage with, and just shifting them outside into that public space for people to encounter in a playful way and perhaps give pause to think. So I think for me, gifting those works in that way outside of the public kind of, or the high-end gallery, is a really it's an exciting and nourishing space, I think, to work in that way. But I also, sorry.
Did you have something to add?
No, no.
Good. Well, thank you so much, Honor. And I think your work really brings into stark contrast the space of the gallery, which is a kind of a monumental space for work of great ambition, and at the same time work on the street, which is much more plebeian. And we think that there's a natural progression as you become more successful, that your work becomes exclusively part of a gallery, which gets the kind of prices that collectors can afford. But I think your work, and also Melissa's, show how it's possible to sustain in a kind of an ethical way, both, one feeding the other in terms of keeping that spirit as part of the world outside as well as inside the white cube. Now let's go back to Japan, and I want to welcome Sachiko Tamashiga. I'll just get your article up there.
Yes.
Sachiko-san, welcome. This is quite an important article that came out of one of the sessions of the Knowledge House for Craft. And if you'd like to, I know this is a long talk that you gave, and it would be a shame to compress it to such a short time, but could you elaborate briefly what you were saying in this story?
Okay. Do I have a time to play that sound or not? Today, not, maybe not. Everybody already listened to.
Do you have it at hand?
No, I don't have. Okay, never mind. Okay.
We'll see how we go. I'll see if I can find it.
Yes, because the sound is very important.
Hmm.
For time being, I just say hello, everybody. I'm very pleased to be here.
Well, good. We've had a bit more success with it this time.
Thank you so
Sachiko.
much. Right. Well, I chose two traditional Japanese families of handcraft in Japan. And one is Myochin family, which now Kevin-san played the sound of their product, which is wind chime, but originally made as fire chopsticks to handle charcoals for the stove, the traditional stove. Anyway, and they Myochin family, who is based in Himeji, and who has 150 dates back to 12th century, and they started as a armorer, then have to change their business from time to time because of change of social structure. Then they started as a wonderful armorer, then blacksmith of fire chopsticks. Then they created wonderful wind chime by using the same shapes of this fire chopsticks. That's Myochin families. And then they started as an armorer, but the present son of the one of the son of 52nd generation chose to be sword maker. So that's why the family evolved from armorer to blacksmith, then wind chime maker and swordsmith. That's the sort of development of this family. And another family, Yamamoto family in Kyoto, who is the mirror worker, whose mirrors mainly made for those shrines and as a sort of altarpiece, because Japan has a belief that those mirror is a symbol of sun goddess, a god. Then we have a Japanese imperial family has a imperial regalias, 3 kind of imperial regalias, which are mirror, sword, and called Magatama comma shaped bead. It's jewel of jade. So, and I chose those 2 families to discuss about the power of handmade things, particularly using this mirror and sword and this technique of transforming from metal to something beyond. Then I chose 2 of them, mirror and sword, to argue the power of things which are made by accomplished craftsmen, Myochin family and Yamamoto family. This might be the area which human being can keep as raison d'être, which means the reason to exist, to survive the coming era of domination of robots and artificial intelligence. It is time that we can look at the traditional craft to enhance and also, acknowledge and enhance the ability of human being making things by hand and to find a way to exist with those highly intelligent robots or machines. This is the big theme behind this, those argument of crafts, because I'm not from crafts world. I'm not specializing in crafts. I came from more sort of general journalistic background. So I try to find out the way for craftsmen who can already have the incredible technique and skills and spirits to transform metal like iron or steel to something beyond that materialistic materialistic substance. I mean, the key is forging, and also polishing. Then we normally say alchemy as a sort of transforming non-precious metals to gold. But I like to bring this another way of looking at even ordinary metal or ordinary material by power of polishing, forging and polishing. You can transform that particular material to something beyond, to transcend, to strike somebody's heart chord. So that's my argument. Then I discuss about these family, the forging, forging metal is he and his brother sword maker. He is this guy who is in the photograph is Munetaka, who is the 53rd generation of Myochin family. The present head of family is now succeeded this blacksmith family business of Myochin family. But his elder brother chose to be a swordsmith, but who can provide the particular material which is only used for sword making, called tamahagane. So they collaborate together. Then his elder brother Munehiro forging the sort of tamahagane, which is steel, special steel, almost more than 30,000 layers by forging. So that it's transformed the more, maybe the at the molecular level, it's transformed the quality of metal. So that's why, although they used to make armor and then sort of fire chopsticks, but the sound of this chopstick shape wind chime made incredible sound, which maybe the sound from this online, it might not sound so brilliantly, but that sound caught or impressed some eminent composers such as Isamu Tomita and also Stevie Wonder said that it is the enigma, it is the special sound they acclaimed, and sometimes the Tomita, whose tune was used for closing, opening Olympic game this year as well, although he was passed away a long time, a few years ago. So he used the sound of this wind chime for his tune, for example.
Wow, that's amazing, Sachiko, and thank you so much for, there's so much more obviously in this article, and I do highly recommend that everyone has a very careful read of this article, and there's much to learn, and it picks up on something that actually was at the beginning of the first journey when we went to South Korea, when we looked at the way in which polishing provided a very key angle for some of the ceramics there, the act of polishing, which is normally just a process that's kind of ephemeral. And we're very fortunate to have had now Jahan Rezakhanlu, who's provided us with an article on this subject. Jahan, are you there? Are you with us?
Yes, hello.
Okay, good.
Yeah, I'm here.
Great to see you. Can you share
yeah,
with us
likewise.
what you discovered?
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, I mean, I'm based, I'm Iranian, but I'm based here in Melbourne, NARM, and studying in RMIT. So because of the lockdowns, I guess I had to explore from sitting, being restricted in lockdown here. So I guess to kind of round off a common topic that Kevin had been addressing in this edition of Garlands was the concept of polishing and kind of how it's a bit overlooked maybe. I also really have to thank Sachiko, who just spoke, who helped me a lot since this was my very first article in this kind of area, so it's a bit nervous. And from my time in Japan, since I was used to be living in Japan, just a kind of as a strange, bonding exercise that we did as exchange students was Hikari Dorodango, which is a kind of, it's something that kids normally do, but it's kind of been reappropriated, especially by Western adults, into this kind of introspective art form where you basically get balls of mud, and in the case in Japan there's muds with lots of ceramic, lots of clay in its formats. So yeah, and it becomes an exercise of patience, of humility, of just getting something from humble beginnings and putting much attention to it so that it nurtures into something bigger and more impressive than it might originally seem to be. And that kind of message that we found in a few instances around the world, so around Asia in this case, I guess. So Kevin himself had gone to Uzbekistan in Central Asia. where they famously where a new type of crafts has been revitalized since the fall of the Soviet Union, where there's this kind of like void of culture that communism was originally filling, and now because of the fall of the Soviet Union, there's this desperate attempt in all of the Central Asian countries to kind of reinvigorate the traditional arts, especially from before the Russian colonial experience. And paper making and paper polishing specifically is a big part of it, because in Uzbekistan, the paper has to be polished because unlike the paper that people are familiar with maybe in Eastern Asia, so like in China, Japan, paper has to be polished just because of the way the quill in Islamic calligraphy, so with Arabic script, works, because instead of having brush strokes, you need a really thin precision with the letters, with the Arabic script letters. So the polished paper is an incredibly important part of the tradition, and it was widely reported. I think it was Babur, the Mughal king, the famous Mughal king, as reported as saying, "Oh, the paper from Samarkand is the best." So yeah, it's very interesting that there's this new revitalization of polishing it, even in a traditional manner, not even with modern machines. So it's not a very maybe economical way of producing paper, but it's certainly for yeah, it's for a greater purpose. It's for cultural revitalization and such. And in fact, yeah, speaking of India, I found this kind of a spiritual link of polishing, the Mauryan polishing, which I don't know if people here are familiar with, which is was one of the architectural cornerstones of the Mauryan Empire, which is one of the was the main northern Indian empire during the time just before Hellenistic times. So around, if I get my biblical calendar right, I think 300 BC, that's kind of time. Where the king Ashoka famously, he had a sudden, he led a massacre, as many tyrants and kings do. However, after it, he had a sudden change of heart and spirituality. And this was widely documented, not through paper or anything, but through his inscriptions in all of these pillars that he launched all around his kingdom, especially in Buddhist sites, holy sites. And the polishing technique still actually puzzles historians. There is a general consensus that it was done using gemstones, specifically diamonds. But the fact that it still puzzles people today actually shows that at the time it was even more impressive. Well, it's still impressive today, but it really stood out. So it really gave this kind of ethereal, otherworldly impression on people, and to kind of showcase that Ashoka himself had gone through this kind of this new plane of thinking. Yeah, you can kind of see it a bit there. Sadly, I've never been able to see it in person, but yeah, it's and that the polishing process in this context, yeah, it was one of spiritual journey, similar to the Dorodango that kind of I started the article with, but on a much bigger empire-wide scale. and yeah, one that still is seen as culturally and religious, spiritually significant
Well,
today.
that really opens things up. Thanks very much, Jahan. I think you're
No worries.
about to celebrate, is it Yelda? The
Yeah, Yelda is
you stay up all night reciting poetry.
yeah, yeah. I've actually got my stuff ready. I was rehearsing earlier today.
Wish
Even
you
my parents have managed to come here.
Oh, good. I wish you a very happy Yelda, and thank you for sharing that and extending Sachiko's story to other kinds of polishing. And we could go beyond that. We've got some burnishing of ceramics, South African ceramics, which is very much a feature in this issue. And we could look further. Kushbu Mati, who's with us today in this session, has added to the conversation before about mirror making in India. And speaking of that, we could go to Lokesh Guy, who gave us the second installment of a very intriguing journey that he's had in the Himalayas. Lokesh, namaste, greetings.
Thank you, namaste. Thanks, Kevin, for accepting this article. So like Kevin said, it's the second part in the series. The article is more like a backstory of a researcher's journey looking for knowledge. So, and it is placed between the folk people of the mountains. And it's also in context of rich and poor, who is rich, who is poor. Like I, as a researcher, going in one way, it could be seen going to folk people that I am poor, or the other way, it could also be seen that I'm looking for knowledge. So it's between rich and poor. So I am poor and the other person is rich, the craft person. The other thing is also, I was very delighted that Kevin could point out the metaphor in the article, and it's the title is To Steal a Golden Earring. And it's like stealing knowledge. That can one actually steal knowledge? And this was something which the craft person said to me, that I'm ready to have a conversation with you as long as you don't steal my earring, which was more like a comic statement that he made, but I thought that was so interesting. So the article also talks about ethics, the part which is highlighted, which one of my gatekeepers said, which I think also brings a very important point of Garland as a magazine, which was that how publication could be accessible to even the layman or the community where the knowledge is coming from. Because mostly, like I'm also based in an academic, and we are pushed to write articles which are more have citation and very academic in nature. So I was glad I could write something which everyone could easily access and read. And the other thing is also, I feel that I was sowing seeds for the larger research by writing this order. So it was an act on my behalf of sowing seed for something bigger which would come, which is in context of clothing. India is a very rich when it comes to textile, and everybody looks and studies about textile, but there's also this gap of knowledge in the area of garments, which is how we clothe the body beside draping, which is cutting, stitching. So those are the areas I'm really interested. Also the cultural making. So it's not just the technique of making, but the culture around what, similar to what Sachiko was saying, and how these things are changing. And finally, like I said, it's almost like a diary page. It's different from any other style of my writing. So where I feel I'm writing in present. So I had taken literally things which I had written in my diary. So I decided to keep a line about my father had COVID, because I felt somewhere things are interrelated. And so yes, so it's not super edited because I want it to be like that. And many layers are there. Thank you.
Right, thank you so much, Lokesh. And how is your father?
Come again, sorry, I missed you.
How is your father?
Yes, my father has recovered. Thank you so much.
That's very good. Very pleased to hear that. And we hope for further stories from the song catcher of craft, Lokesh Guy, one of the Garland perennials. Thank you so much. And now we go to Nepal, close by, to Gary. Do I say Warnell or Warnell? Gary, are you there? I know Gary's internet connection was a bit, looks like Gary. Yeah, we can. Welcome, and thank you for the second of what's quite an amazing series of stories from Nepal. And this time you look at bronze casting. Can you share with us that story?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I want to thank you, Kevin, and everyone who's joined this session, and also the articles which I've read through, which have been absolutely fascinating and just wonderful to read. A little bit about my background. I had 30 years working in ceramics, and when I arrived in Nepal in 2012 for the first time, I encountered an incredible range of crafts in the Kathmandu Valley, which were part of the Newari tradition. The Newaris are the indigenous people of the Kathmandu Valley. And access to these craftsmen is usually very difficult for foreigners, but because the people that my two assistants showed pictures of my ceramics to these craftsmen, and they welcomed me into their homes, into their workshops, and into their families. So I was extremely fortunate to be able to record some of these people. Now, this article is about Pradeep Mahadjan, who's a Newari bronze caster, and a lot of these traditional crafts are in danger of dying out because the children of these craftsmen are actually, they're not wanting to continue something that has gone on for hundreds of years. So I wanted really to, in this series of articles, record a kind of dying breed of craftsmen who have parents and grandparents and great-grandparents in this. Now, the story, if you go through it, there's a lot of course, these are largely religious objects or objects used in Buddhism and sometimes Hinduism, and the people who work in these traditional crafts, particularly Pradeep, he has studied the Buddhist texts. So in order to actually be able to work in this field, you have to have a very deep understanding of the Buddhist texts in order to kind of be a legitimate craftsman. So that's one of the fields that I think is very interesting. These workshops are made up largely of specialists. So there will be somebody who is preparing the wax, who is a specialist. There is somebody who is doing the initial clay work. Then there are people making the molds, and then there are people who are assembling these pieces ready for the bronze casting. And I was very lucky because Pradeep invited me to stay with him for several days. And so I was in the home with them, eating with the family. Not too much conversation with the rest of the family because none of them speak English. He was the only one, and even his wife didn't speak English very much. But these individuals are sometimes brought in from other parts of the community. For example, the person who prepares the bronze is a specialist who travels around all of the bronze casting foundries in the valley. And so they have to book him in advance, and he comes and he just handles the preparation of the metal. He doesn't do anything else. And it's a bit like a cook cooking in a kitchen. He kind of prepares the metal and then tests it and then okays it ready for casting. So I found all of these kind of these individuals in the community very focused on one or two fields. Kevin, if you just scroll down a little bit more. So a little bit, yeah. This is after the casting, and it's a polishing process which takes place. So actually, the bronze is cast, and then there is somebody who fills in the holes with his with kind of welding, kind of, I don't know what they call it, but anyway, he fills in the holes that are missing in the castings. And then there is another specialist or a group of specialists, like the one in this picture. It's a family who all do the well, in a way, the refining of each of these statues before it goes then to the final polisher. And then once the polishing is done, these pieces are usually gilded, and I think we will see in a future article this taken to the next stage. But the interesting thing about these families, I had prepared some pictures, but I think maybe we don't really have time for this. I wanted to show you something of the landscape around these communities, because they're basically rice paddies and vegetable gardens and small communities where people live and work in the same building. And as you can see in this picture, the family are taking a break with playing with children, having cups of tea and that kind of thing. So yeah.
Thank you so much, Gary. And perhaps we can share those images through our kind of social channels so that it can be a bit of background, as you say. But it's wonderful that you share this, and obviously polishing comes up again in this story. It certainly is becoming a particular theme, but the way you've lived with these people and shared not just amazing images through your lens, but the words that you've chosen are particularly poignant.
What I find, Kevin, is the amount of joy that is in these people's lives is something that drew me to Nepal in the first place. They are not very wealthy people. They live in very simple conditions. I mean, their houses are very basic inside, but there's just so much joy, and they're so relaxed about their work. When I look at some of these castings, and I think they're so complex, and these people they're just very relaxed about it, and no problem, you know. And I think that was a really wonderful lesson for me to take away from this project.
Terrific. That's very interesting. Thanks so much, Gary. And now we go to Turkey, back to a friend from previous articles. Songul Aral, are you with us?
Hello.
Hello.
Hello, do you hear me?
We hear you, but we can't see you. Is that right?
Yes. Greetings, everyone from Turkey in Malatya. In my article, there is a brief summary of the life of the academician Lale, whom I met years ago, and the story continues. A serious, hardworking woman and teacher. The important things is the establishment of 3 museums equipped with the historical object of the past that transfers to the future. She is a mother and a working woman. The story is actually, this is the life of the old woman in Turkey. I will leave my word to my teacher Lale, and her beautiful daughter is Nihal, the hero of the story. I wrote in our Ankara capital. I want you to hear her story in her own voices in 2 minutes, and stay with Lale and Hilt and Lale and Nihal. Do you hear me? Nihal,
Yes,
Lale?
Yes, I hear you. Hi.
I can also.
Okay. Hi, Kevin. Hi, everybody and colleagues. I'm Lale. I'm from Turkey and Ankara. Do you hear me?
Yes, we hear.
Okay. Thank you very much, Songül, for introducing to nice people. I'm very happy, and thank you too.
I like your magazine and your work very much. I have been working as an art and craft teacher more than 40 years at the university in Ankara, Turkey. I'm in love with my job. I like all of the world culture. I am using textile products, leather, beads, and many things. I make traditional hats and traditional dolls and teach technique. My childhood years were filled with art education. My first teacher was my grandmother. The second teacher was my mother. My grandmother breed or to raise silkworms, made yarns, dyed it, wove, and saved it. I remember when I was 6 years, she was in the 90 years old. She used to knit me a bag and hats with corn husk. Now I can make it. My second teacher was my mother, married at 15 years old. She said she wanted to play. She used to make handmade dolls with wool in her bed, quilt and pillow with wool inside. I asked my mom in 2004 to make those dolls. She was very, very happy. When I came from work every day, her traditional dolls were sitting on the chair. I was saying that these were museum. She was very happy. Now they are in the museum. My mother died in 2006. Mustafa Kara was the governor of the Kastamonu in 2008. She said, we found built a museum only with 3 hats. Can you help us? We say yes. And after that day, Nüket mother and me worked very happily with the museum director İlknur. Now we have 1,000 hats. My hat collection, my students' work, and the hats we collected are in the museum. The museum has become a World Hat Museum. If you want, you can donate your hats to the museum with your name. I used Governor Kara that I would donate my mother's traditional handmade dolls and establish a museum on her behalf. We established the Traditional Doll Museum in 2009. I invite you to visit our museum. And then the same time with my colleague established the Lace Museum. You can see the museum as well. But he was our esteemed Governor Kara, died 2013. And my dear friends, Tomris died 2017. Excuse me. Now my dream is to establish a clothing museum. I think with Governor Büyükelçen, we will establish this museum in Eskişehir soon. I prepared a mini exhibition for you. Now you can see a mini exhibition for you. You can see. This collection is Midas, BC 1200 Midas tomb. Now you can see Midas tombs. Everything is Anatolian Museum. And like this. And the mini exhibition is here. Traditional dolls, like this. Okay. Finish. I am finished.
That's
It is
that's wonderful. Thank you so much, and we look forward
Thank you.
to continuing this amazing series of stories from Turkey. And thank you so much, Songul, as well, for being such a beautiful ambassador for your country in these stories. And we hope to continue supporting you through all of your projects, exhibitions, and so on, that enable us to understand the wonder of Turkish craft. So thank you.
And
Thank you.
Kyun.
Thank you too.
Thank you, Kyun. Thank you,
Okay.
Nihal.
Now-
Teşekkürler Nihal, teşekkürler Lale Hoca, sağ olun. Ve and everybody, happy New Year and happy Christmas.
Thank you so much. And
Yes.
so now we've run out of time. What I'll do is share later some stories from Chile and Ecuador, because these are people in a different time zone, so they could not join us. But I'd just like to acknowledge that we are fresh with the news that the candidate for the presidency in Chile, Gabriel Boric, has been successful, which represents a new era for Chile, even though it they were threatened to go back to the era of Pinochet. So this is a wonderful moment of solidarity with our Chilean friends. So hopefully you'll join and have a look at some of the stories that they've shared as well. But I'd like to now move to our thinker maker, Bridget Kennedy. Bridget, are you there?
Yes, thank you, Kevin.
There you are, in your garden. Now, Bridget's quite an important figure for us. Her work is featured in the Sydney issue, but as well as being a jeweler, and a very prominent jeweler, even running a gallery, she has many other projects that I think are quite innovative in terms of understanding, a bit like with Honor and Melissa, an understanding of how practice can extend beyond the gallery and even the bench into the world. Would you like to share with us some of the thoughts and projects that have been part of your journey that we can learn from, Bridget? And I have your PDF to share as well.
Oh, thank you, Kevin. Yes, first of all, I'd just like to acknowledge that I'm speaking here from Sydney, Camaragal country, which is a beautiful part in Lane Cove, surrounded by bushland and waterways. A little bit about me. I grew up in the 1970s, watching my mother fire enamel jewelry and make her own leather sandals, and we had a pottery wheel and a kiln, and I knitted and made handmade paper, and it was just a part of my life. And my mother, who's now in her 80s, still spins and dyes her own wool and weaves and knits. But for many years as a young adult, leaving the family fold and building my own identity, I actually now regretfully look back on how I rejected the idea of craft as having value. And I focused my arts practice actually on majoring in painting. And it wasn't really until I left my career in the corporate world of banking and finance and all of that, that entails, and retrained in jewelry and object design, that I really acknowledged my craft and my love of craft and crafting, and really the richness that it can bring beyond the actual act of making. And as Kevin said, I'm a small business owner and also a jewelry and object artist, and I have both a production and exhibition practice. And so as a gallery owner and maker, I sell things that I and others make for money. And I'm really fortunate in that my workshop is also located within the physical space of the gallery. So this has really allowed me to observe how people can engage and value with objects in the gallery space in different ways. And I feel really fortunate with that, because that can be missing for a maker who's working alone in their studio. And one of the things that I've learned during this time of running my business is that I find it easier to sell to people once I've built a relationship or connection with them in some way, and that, you know, my business of exhibiting work, which I thought was quite separate to my arts practice, has actually really informed my work quite fundamentally. So, and you know, as a maker, I've also become more concerned around the use of raw materials and the idea of making yet more stuff in, you know, really what we have is an overloaded planet. Yet I have an understanding and a real appreciation of the importance of the handmade crafted object. And so over the last few years, I've really started to explore ways that value and meaning can be added to the transactional aspect of the object exchange, and how objects can navigate relationships between makers and viewers and wearers and audiences, and the actual perceived value of that object. And the article in Garland really describes a number of projects that explore these ideas. The first one that was a project called Just Help Yourself, Why Don't You, where they were like 10,000 little beeswax rings that I made, and they contained a number of materials like coal and silver, zinc, tin and lead and gold. And I invited people to take a ring in exchange for sort of a small monetary item, which was an honesty system. And I was really interested in whether people would attempt to destroy this artwork for the gold in the center of the ring, in the center of this installation, and generally how they would interact with the work, which was placed on the floor. And the exhibition was exhibited a number of times, both in a gallery context and also in a sort of wider, more general community accessible location. One of the lessons I learned from this project was that locating objects sort of with sort of small dimensions on a flat floor, and a floor surface can be quite tricky. A lot of people thought they were walking on a carpet, and so sort of walked through the artwork. And this didn't happen when the work was in a traditional gallery context, more sort of when I took it out into the community, and also that some people were honest in their monetary donation and some weren't. But one of the things I found really interesting with this project was that the stories I received from people on what they had done with their rings. So for example, someone had actually proposed with their ring, and another one had actually valued this little wax object enough to keep it in the freezer over a hot summer from melting. And this kind of anecdotal feedback that I got really increased my curiosity in understanding what happens to an object once it leaves the gallery, you know, or shop environment, and how it's treated or valued, and whether it's loved. So I took these ideas a little bit further in my next project, which was Choice Made, where again I worked with wax, and it had objects in materials embedded into the material, including gold. But this time, I mean, people still had the object to interact and to take something from the work, but I asked them to actually leave their details. So there was no financial exchange, but after they had interacted, I contacted them all, and I requested an image and some input into what they had done with this object, whether they had destroyed it in search of gold or whether they had passed it on, and some feedback. So instead of this sort of this object just going out into the world and me not knowing, I was able to create a conversation around the object, and the community input then sort of contributed to the richness, I think, of the artwork. And each time it was, I think, exhibited 6 times, and each time there was a book that was formed. So this book documented all of the images and the processes and the stories from each exhibition as the artwork diminished, and now there's like a tiny little bit of it left. And then my most I guess comprehensive work to date, which was another work called A Year of Time, and then a subsequent work called Rethinking Value, delved even deeper and engaged with the relationship between the participant, object and maker, and on a much more intimate level. And it still explored concepts of time and the social, material and cultural values around the object. And I was trying to look at ideas of what our world could look like if money played a much less central role in our lives. And this became more about the share economy and this kind of swapping and people making judgments around values and the value of time. So this was a exhibition of 60 objects that I made over one calendar year. So they were a little woven. I mean, I'm a jeweler by trade, but I sort of like enjoy working with my hands. So there was 60 objects made over a year. And there was a small silver disc on the bottom of each of these objects, which had the amount of minutes that had taken to make each one. And then people were invited to purchase that object either for a hourly rate that they decided, whatever that was worth, what object was worth, or the number of minutes that it took to make. So they exchanged their time for my time effectively by doing sort of various different tasks. And what I found, so it actually took me a whole year to then sort of complete these exchanges. It took me a year to make the original work, and then it took a year to sort of create these exchanges and document the whole process. So what I found with this project is that it became messy. Like there was the people and these exchanges added incredible richness to the artwork, but it also made it a lot more complex. And it was there was just this kind of richness that didn't happen if there had just been this exchange of cold cash. And I would have I invited people into my house and other projects formed from it. And there was this level of trust that happened. And I think people felt there was a sense of agency around this whole project that, people feel really connected to. But yeah, it was pretty messy. There's some people chose to exchange the objects for money, and they found that challenging when they had to place a value on the object. It wasn't just like this, this much dollars. They had to decide how much my time was worth in money, and a lot of people found that quite challenging. Any of the cash that I actually received, I then actually translated into Filipino pesos. I have a connection to that country through my family, and I then mixed that. I then actually wove all of that money into another vessel. And I think that one of the big things I got out of that project was that the exchanges, they were sometimes the communication was really important, and you needed to be flexible around people and how they communicated. And these exchanges also took a lot of time as well. And while these exchanges reduced the distance between me as the maker and the participant, sometimes there is this, the fact that money is this sort of quick, cold, fast transaction. It can create a distance and can keep us separate, and that can actually be a relief sometimes. But then there is also a loss around that. So we have this convenience of cash transactions, but I think that we lose something, or there's the potential of loss around that. And I just find it interesting exploring ideas about, if money played a less central role in our lives. And I don't know if that's because my original background was in banking and finance, whether this interests me, or, I think that there's lots of reasons. But no, not all of the projects, the share economy projects that I've been involved with have been successful. I tried an art jewelry bank where people could borrow jewelry for a period of time, and that really didn't work. I only rented one piece. People want to own jewelry. I find there's still a strong emotional attachment to jewelry, so people actually wanted to own it. And then COVID hit, and I think like Anna Freeman, who spoke earlier, I trialed bringing my work into my driveway during our last lockdown, but there were mixed responses to this because I had a gallery plinth in my driveway. The work I was exhibiting wasn't necessarily crafted works. It was objects that were important to me. The exchange process sometimes worked, sometimes didn't. The weather got in the way. I think though that with a bit more time and thought, that's something that I think could be explored further, just taking the gallery to the community and to a different community that wouldn't necessarily visit a gallery. And I think I found that over the years, my interest in craft and participatory art and also the gift economy has really deepened. And I don't know if it's because I also sell work or there's all these sort of things going around in my head, but it just feels like my boundaries between my life and my art and my work practice have become a lot less defined, and everything's sort of melding into one. And I'm also involved in these other community projects like a repair cafe and an edible garden trail, and also a library of things. And these interventions, these kind of gentle interventions in the community that kind of engage and build communities has actually was partly the impetus why I recently decided to run as a candidate in my local government elections. And the policies that I ran on were around community engagement and sustainable share economy projects. And I think what all these projects have in common, like my sort of participatory artworks, is that they're crafted with input from the community. I mean, these artworks that I've done over the last few years really wouldn't be what they are. They wouldn't have the richness without that input, and feedback from the community. I think that one of the, there's a lot of work setting up these projects, but there's just so many people. What I've found, like running a gallery and being in the community with these projects, is that there are so many people that actually want to contribute and engage in sustainable change and make a difference, but they don't know how to. And these projects actually give them a sense of purpose and a way of connecting. And I guess, while my new sort of role is in local government, when I was doing all this door knocking, on the campaign trail, was one of the key things, the key sort of takeaways was that my community doesn't feel listened to. And I think that there's a lot of people worldwide that feel this way. And there's this sort of loss of agency and connection. And we know that we build connections through craft, and that the act of working with our hands is so good for our mental well-being. And I've been elected as a councillor, and I've been trying to work out how I can bring my participatory arts practice and craft into my role as a councillor to connect and engage with my community and to have them feel listened to and engaged. And I just think that could be a really amazing art project if I can kind of work out how that could work. I have no idea. But the last few days I've been sort of reflecting on the many interesting articles in this month's Garland, and an excerpt by Liliana, who we heard from earlier in this month's edition, really resonated with me, and I just thought it'd be nice to leave it with you, which is that craft is not just about objects. It's about human connection, an essential element in guaranteeing lifelong health, according to recent research. Craft is also about the time and dedication spent making something that will add to the lives of both makers and users. It's about care for others, respect from others, and pride for the result of one's efforts. It's about a connection with materials, and by extension, the environment in which those materials dwell. For craft to flourish and remain meaningful in the lives of those that produce them, we must deprioritise economic growth and give priority to people's happiness, well-being, and regular opportunities to enjoy the good life. So I just want to leave it at that. I felt that was a really nice way to think about craft. So
thank you, Kevin. Thank you so much, Bridget, for rounding it off in such a good way. And I think you find that in all the talks that we've heard in this launch, they all have some feet on the ground. There is a sense in which it connects with the people who are producing and making and using these objects. And I think that augurs very well. And now that you're taking it into the political sphere, being one of the voices of craft, Bridget, we hope to see the way in which that's considered very relevant. So thank you, everyone, for being here. We'll just close it off now before we do a little screenshot group photo if you'd like to stay with us. So thank you so much for sharing this, and enjoy the rest of Garland.